Namaskara. As part of Krishna to Kaveri celebrations at Azim Premji University and Bangalore International Center, today we are in conversation with Carnatic musician Vidushi Chitra Sri Krishna. We will be talking about various aspects of Carnatic music, historical as well as contemporary issues. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
Pleasure.
Ma'am, I would like to start by asking you, since you've been looking at composers of different era and trying to also incorporate composers of different time and try to project their music in your concerts and different venues. If you think of it, it's pretty well known that Purandara Dasa was the person who started codifying something that was the Marga system. Yeah. And if you could just in a nutshell say what was his major contribution so that it sort of helped Carnatic music become what it is today, it would be very helpful.
Thank you for inviting me. Purandara Dasa, I think the key contribution to Carnatic music is that he standardized and simplified the teaching process. Basically, he created a template which made easy transmission of Carnatic music over the centuries. So he set up what we call building blocks, initial exercises with which students train in Carnatic music, beginning with Sarali Varse, Jante Varse, Alankaras and Geetam. So what happens is when students train, they begin with basic exercises where they get a good knowledge, a grip of both melody, raga and tala, rhythm. And after that, then they graduate to singing songs with simple words, Geetams. So the process is gradual and he made it easy so that the training also it's easy. And we know that Carnatic music is mostly an oral tradition. So it continues from guru to disciple and is taught. So he made the whole process easy by codifying this.
Yeah. And that was around the let's say the prime of Vijayanagara period or towards the end of the Vijayanagara period that he was active.
Yeah. In fact, I just want to pause, interrupt if you don't mind. Actually, it started a little earlier than Purandara Sri Padaraya, who was a prime mover of Madhavacharya's Dvaita Vedanta, a widely respected movement. But Sri Padaraya, who was a Haridasa poet and philosopher, he also popularized raga-based and tala-based composition like Uga Boga, Suladi. And all that he taught to his disciple Vyasaraya. And then Vyasaraya in turn, he continued teaching to his disciple Purandara. So it was a tradition that had already started. But Purandara and Purandara made it easy for subsequent generations by creating that template.
Thank you for that. I think, but what's sort of missing in this jigsaw of, let's say, Carnatic history, if you want to put in Karnataka, is that we have the glorious Trinity, which come 200 years later. Yeah. And then we have the Mysuru kingdom, and then there are many composers within the Mysuru patronage. But before that, the Trinity happened 500, 600 kilometers away. And there's Purandara Dasa who was there much earlier. Of course, there was Annamacharya in Andhra Pradesh and other composers who are, let's say, immediately about just, let's say, 2 generations away from Purandara Dasa. But there was a void, it seems, in Karnataka at least. If you think back at it, would you point out what could have been the reason for that?
Interesting question. But we need to remember one thing, and this is true even today. Classical music largely flourishes because of patronage. And the reason why it flourished and we got to this point is because, say, in the 20th century, the Mysore royal court and the Maharaja of Mysore, Jayachamrajendra Wadiyar, because he himself, not only was he a composer, but he was also a patron and he encouraged musicians. So when you hear facts like that, you hear sponsors, then it becomes easier for these musicians to be known and also their compositions to be highlighted. So whether it is Mysore court or even the Tanjavur Nayaks, so it's largely because of royal patronage or wealthy people who are art patrons. So I believe that composing continued to happen. There were composers, but it was largely due to the patronage of kings and nobles. That's when the Carnatic music thrived, and the compositions came to light. And we also got to know more about these composers, and they've all been written. Like for instance, Mysore Vasudevachar in the 1950s. He's authored a book in Kannada, Na Kanda Kalavidare. So it contains biographies of composers.
Yeah, yeah.
So those are all instances where there is material, data material that you can rely on, and it makes it easier for us to understand when you want to understand history of Carnatic music.
Interesting. But his influence did seem to have traveled, right? I mean,
So Vasudevacharya went to Chennai, and he was at Kalakshetra for many years.
I'm talking about the dasas.
Yes.
The two, let's say, they are acknowledged at least, right? Dasa, Purandara Dasa name comes across in several compositions also of the Trinity, I suppose, right?
Yes.
So somehow the tradition went there.
Absolutely.
And then it traveled back. And it, of course, spread all over South India.
Yes, absolutely. Because the training continued.
Yeah.
The tradition continued, and musicians, the songs were taught. So again, Purandaradasas, Devarnamas, and of course they heard about it. So that is why even in some of the compositions, the Trinity, there is reference.
Yeah. But as a musician who's sung all these compositions in so many places, would you say, if you see the later composers of Karnataka, let's say late 19th century, early 20th century composers, what kind of influence do you see in their compositions compared to what you would say in larger contemporaries of the same time?
When you look at 20th century composers, like say Jaya Chamarajendra Vodiyar or Patnam Subramania, Mysore Vasudevacharya, they were influenced by
all the Vainikas of the Mysore.
And the Vainikas. For instance, Veena Seshanna.
Yeah.
Not only was he influenced by Carnatic composers of an earlier era, but also he was revered for his knowledge in Hindustani music. Gauhar Jan and all their songs. Somehow those phrases ended up when he was playing the veena as well. So the influence has always been there, because we need to remember that listening is part of the journey in this Carnatic music. So much of what we listen, we imbibe, and then we build on that. So composers of the 20th century, while they listened, and then they were influenced by composers from earlier era. And of course, Trinity continues to be the gold standard.
So that's really the marker I wanted to come to. So you said Trinity is the gold standard, and I think scholars, musicians, practitioners, teachers of all generations, at least since the 1950s that we have records of, have repeatedly said that that's the gold standard for whatever reasons. And there are three different, let's say, the Mahanadis of Carnatic music. And I think there's no exaggeration in saying that they're absolutely brilliant. Nothing, compares in terms of volume, size, diversity, everything.
Yes.
Right? Scholarship, everything. But if you think of it, has the Carnatic concert scene, at least, has been blind to composers who are not, let's say, from that school, or at least from that thought process?
And you're talking about Trinity.
Trinity in particular. But Trinity is brilliant. I think there's no question. I think, who am I, really? Absolutely brilliant. And there must be more of them in concerts. But you think there have been enough, let's say, of events, like let's say somebody like M.D. Ramanathan's compositions, or for example, Balmurali Krishna's compositions, who are actually brilliant composers of modern times. But apart from their students, or for them, some of them, they don't have, let's say, a big tradition or following as well. And if you think of it, do you think it suffers a bit? If you include Karnataka, I think it becomes a much bigger number.
This is a very interesting question, because I've often thought why modern composers don't get enough airplay.
Yeah.
But see, the Trinity is a very hard act to follow. One, and I want to refer to this term Vagyakaras, which is very special to Carnatic music composers, because Vagyakara is one who not only writes the lyrics but also sets tune to the song. And only in Carnatic music you come across this. So the Trinities, Tyagaraja, Muthuswami Dikshidhar and Shyama Shastri were Vagyakaras. When you look at modern composers, there are many of them, but their compositions are not heard. Many reasons. One is the audience willing. How open are they to hearing compositions of modern composers? Because when you go to any Carnatic concert, the expectation is, yes, they will want to hear enough of the Trinity composition.
Absolutely.
Because that kind of sets a tone that, okay, this is a person who has been well trained, and how does this person interpret that composition of a Trinity, composed by the Trinity? It's like a litmus test, let's say.
Absolutely.
So that is part of it. And also, when you introduce too many new composers or new compositions, you need to do it very judiciously, because you don't know how the audience will accept that. But it is happening at a very slow rate when more modern composers are seeing more of their compositions being heard. But also we must understand that because we don't get enough of an audience, it's always a challenge for Carnatic concert halls to be full. I mean, that is a challenge we've seen. Only tier 1 artists have full halls. On top of that, if you add something like, if you're bringing them, you need to know how the audience will receive that. So many reasons as to why we don't hear enough. So it is not about technicality, the caliber.
Yeah.
I don't think that is at play here.
Yeah.
But many other things also are need to be considered.
But if you think of it, perhaps there have been success stories amongst, all this in terms of, for example, in Tillanas and
Yes.
and other
Yes.
kinds of compositions,
Yes.
where I think many of the modern composers have featured
Yes.
prominently, haven't they?
Yes. Tillanas and all those lighter pieces towards the end of the
Towards the end
concert.
of the concert.
Then there seems to be a more preponderance of more modern compositions coming to.
Yeah. And is this also the reason why there have been more Tillana composers?
Yes and no, because see, Tillana is itself a very 19th, 20th century genre. It's a more recent genre.
Yeah.
And it is popular in dance performances, and also it has a very fast pace. So when you want to end the concert on a high note, I would say it's not easy to compose a Tillana. I mean, not that anybody can compose
Absolutely
a Tillana. So
anybody can't be Lal
but
Guri.
I can't mention it because. But whether it is even songs, or there are many composers who just compose Tamil songs on Muruga and all that. So you see more time, and also Ambujam Krishna, we are hearing more. So usually what happens is, when there is a musician like Balamurali Krishna or M.D. Ramanathan, it's usually other musicians or disciples of that musician who will take a little more effort to propagate the compositions of that composer. All these little things help, these steps, so that how will we hear more compositions of such modern composers. But as you said, I think it's easier introducing a Tillana rather than a full-fledged Kriti when you want by any modern composer. It seems to be more, audiences seem to be more open.
One last thing before we end. If you think of the modern scene, do you see this, let's say, the divide, or let's say at least the argument that the instrumental is blind to the Vagyakara tradition? Have you come across that? And do you feel that there is some merit to it, given how some of the modern players are playing some of the compositions? And do you think it's fair, or do you think it's all fair in the game of evolving music?
Excellent question. See, we need to remember that Indian classical music, Carnatic music, is vocal dominated.
Yeah.
Mostly you have vocal concerts, because Sahitya, the lyrics, plays a very important role. So how do instrumentalists navigate this? It's not, while yes, some of them, like I've seen Ramana Balachandran, who's a Veena player, he sings the lyrics and then he plays it, so that the audience is familiar with the words, and some maybe kritis that they already know, but there is some kind of a connect with the audience when when he sings a phrase, or and then he plays the same on the veena. But you can't do that all the time. So, but they have somehow. Uh, we need to be aware that sahitya anyway is missing. When they don't this thing, so they come up with different innovative methods to make their instrumental music a vibrant tradition. One, of course, collaborations, and then the focus on different permutations when it comes to melody, raga, and tala, the technicalities, all that. Because in the absence of song lyrics, what do you do? So it is always, that is always a question mark for, because instrumentalists, one, you don't see that many instrumental concerts in a music scene, especially in the Chennai music scene. I've spoken to so many instrumentalists. The ratio is quite low because there is always a preference for vocal concerts, and that is how it continues because of the importance of lyrics, Sahitya. And that is something we can't change.
I think has covered fair ground in a very short time. I thank you again for making time today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Namaskara.
Namaskara.